Hello, I'm Dennis Clancy, and I'm going to tell you who killed Elena Alves in The Undoing, the series on HBO Max. Right now, we just watched episode 5 this past Sunday. There are 6 episodes, and this coming Sunday will be episode 6. Now, as a caveat before we get started, I recognize that HBO is calling this season 1 of The Undoing, so it's entirely possible that they will string this into 2 seasons. I'm really hoping that they don't, but it is very possible. There are other red herrings that they can throw at us. That is for certain. Either way, there's one person who is clearly the best for having killed Elena Alves. And I haven't heard this theory from anyone before. I've scoured the internet looking for stuff, so I'm going to give it to you now. And it really plays to classic murder mystery, what some would call a fair play mystery. I'm going to tell you what some of those components are and why HBO and the creators of The Undoing have an incentive for driving towards those norms. First, your murderer is going to show up in the first episode, typically. They need to be there at the beginning of everything happening because when the viewer finally learns who it was, they want to feel as if they had the broadest chance to having figured it out. And if it's a character that showed up later in the series or in the last episode, it kind of feels unfair. It violates fair play. And so the person we're talking about here today shows up in the first episode. Second is that they're typically a fairly neutral character, right? They're certainly not a positive character, one that we have a strong affinity for, connection with. The reason for that is that murder is tied to a sense of justice, and we typically don't like seeing people we like getting charged with crimes. And so if you get to the end and learn someone that you really liked did the murder, you're kind of conflicted a little bit. And I think in general, you're probably not going to be as excited about the end of the series. You're not going to leave a great review. You're not going to really tell your friends about it. There's a lot of problems when it's a character that you really, really liked and you're kind of let down by the end. You want to kind of be hooked. You want to feel like it's plausible. It needs to be someone that you're not fully invested in. Third, the series shouldn't throw suspicion on this person too early or drop too many clues about the fact that they could have murdered this person. Why? Because then it just becomes obvious. And when they finally say Hugh Grant killed Elena Alves or Donald Sutherland killed Elena Alves, it's somewhat less gratifying because you kind of understood that that was a possibility, and you could also draw tons of conclusions as to how it actually happened. It was just too obvious, wasn't clever, right? Now, HBO could do that. They could take one of the obvious characters. The creators of Undoing could take a normal character and say, yep, it was that person all along. But I kind of feel like we feel cheated at that point, as if they've created some clickbait for us, as if they've given the illusion that there's some great rubric, some great puzzle for us to solve, and then they said, yeah, no, it was just this guy. It is incredibly ungratifying. And I come to this analysis with those 3 ideas of classic murder mystery, believing that HBO and the makers of Undoing will do it right. Let's first walk through a number of people that I think are obvious and that we should probably rule out. As part of this too, when I get to who the actual murderer is, I might not get all the details right as to why and how it happened, because there's a ton of exposition that I believe will happen in episode 6, and if not in episode 6, into season 2. At any rate, let's get started. Donald Sutherland. Donald Sutherland was kind of one of those obvious people early on. There's a number of things going on here. For one, Hugh Grant went and asked him for money. You can bet that as soon as Hugh Grant asked him for money, he did his research and found out exactly what was going on. He knew what Hugh Grant was doing to his daughter. He also was at the fundraiser that night. We don't see him later on, and I think that's a critical clue to why he's not actually the murderer here. But we could certainly see him as the murderer, right? We know he's a vindictive guy. We know that he uses eloquent language about the type of person that he recognizes he is. An interesting side note there in theory that I think might be consequential but might not be is that it's entirely possible that the blonde lawyer, I believe her name is Lily or Lori Lily, yeah, is possibly his daughter, like Nicole Kidman's half-sister, in the sense that he had her out of wedlock. But we know that there's a relationship there, and we know that Donald Sutherland rebuffs the blonde lawyer in the first episode when she shows up to the fundraiser. So there was something happening there in that time. I interpreted that it was either kind of the fact that he never kind of recognizes her and she's looking for recognition, or it has something to do with a relationship or the degree to which she's trying to help him or get in with him, possibly as a lawyer kind of client kind of relationship. She possibly told Donald Sutherland herself about what happened with Hugh Grant when Hugh Grant came for her advice, and that's how he found out. At any rate, Donald Sutherland, if they tell us it's him, it's just disappointing. Hugh Grant, yep, clear motive. He's just lost his job. He's about to lose his family potentially. We know he was there. It's too obvious and not clever. Nicole Kidman, same thing. I think we can pretty much assume that everyone knew what Hugh Grant was doing, right? The lawyer knew, Donald Sutherland knew, Nicole Kidman knew, the kid knew, other people knew, and we'll get to that. But at any rate, it's not clever if Nicole Kidman did it. I'm not going to get into the theories of what Hugh Grant was probably going to do for those 2 days originally when he was leaving. There's a lot of thoughts about what he was potentially looking to do with Elena Alves during that time. We can assume that it was something that was probably positive and not in terms of like planning to kill her during that time. Let's go through these other potential suspects. The kid. We just got the red herring that the kid has the sculpting hammer in his violin case. We've gotten these red herrings at the end of almost every episode at this point. You can pretty much assume he's not the killer. But it opens up an interesting question of a killer being someone who's either less strong or smaller than Elena. How could that potentially happen? It could happen in a scenario where she was drugged and she was already on the floor and she was maybe unconscious already, and then she was attacked with the hammer. But for them to bring out a fact in the 6th episode that she was drugged, it just had to have been something that was brought up sooner in the series. So for that reason, I'm going to rule out her son, Nicole Kidman's son, and the daughter of the blonde lawyer. We're almost out of characters at that point. Can you think of who else is left? If you have a theory of who killed Elena Alves at this point, please just write it below. Write it in the comments. Let me know what you're thinking. Go ahead. Do it. Then I'll tell you. All right, I was making the video and I realized I left someone out. You probably guessed who that person is. It's the blonde lawyer. I'm going to tell you why she's not the killer. It's just too quaint and too obvious. We've known for a long time that there is something going on that we haven't quite figured out. So I anticipate that we'll get more exposition about the background of her character in episode 6. She's one of the red herrings at the end of the episode episode 5, along with Nicole Kidman's son. We know that there's something going on. We know that she's vying for attention from Donald Sutherland. We know that there's more to their relationship than we've been previously told. We also know that she knows that Hugh Grant is somewhere other than the hospital the night of the fundraiser. Why? Because one, I think she actually probably did know that Hugh Grant got fired. Maybe she didn't. I don't know. I'll bet on the one. Two, when Nicole Kidman gets the call from Hugh Grant, she's at the fundraiser. He says he's at the hospital a little later, says it's going to be a while. She goes over to her friends. Nicole Kidman goes over to her friends, blonde lawyer being one of them, and says he's going to be at the hospital all night. They talk a little bit about how horrible it must be to be a child cancer doctor, but she's there, she hears it. It leads us to think, if we dig deep, that she's perfectly aware that Hugh Grant is with his mistress. Now, we don't know that she knows he has a mistress. I just think that there's something more there, and she knows certain things that she's not telling us. And she might even, from a prosecutorial standpoint, be acting with good intent. I might be wrong, but if she's the killer, again, I'm just disappointed. The murderer of Elena Alves is the headmaster, or it damn well should be, if HBO and the makers of Undoing are smart. Why? Because it's not entirely obvious, but when you start to peel away certain details, it's very plausible. He was there from the start. He's a fairly neutral character. He did something that we probably kind of don't like, which is suggest that Nicole Kidman's son be homeschooled. And we don't have any suspicion thrown at him just yet. But he's been there all along. What are the things connecting him to this? For one, we learned that Hugh Grant's son saw Hugh Grant talking to Elena out in front of the school. We know that the headmaster is always out in front of the school, and he likely saw it as well. Now, I don't want to get too far into the motives of Elena Alves because I think that becomes dangerous. You can assume that she was trying to manipulate the men in her life, but you could also assume that she had fairly good intentions. You just don't want to go there yet because she at least recognized, we think, maybe you think, maybe you don't, some positivity in Nicole Kidman in the process of everything, and maybe that led to her conscience telling her that she shouldn't necessarily be in a relationship with Hugh Grant, that she was pulling that family apart. At any rate, there was something else going on. One, with the violin teacher and potentially the headmaster. I think beyond a doubt, there's something going on with the headmaster. In the first episode, the fundraiser was for two things. One, more money for the teachers. It leads you wondering, why do the teachers need more money? And I get it, like all teachers need more money in this country because they don't get paid enough. Totally agree with you there. It is a noble profession. Team teachers, I'm there with you. The second thing was that they wanted to raise money for scholarships in the name of diversity. It also makes you wonder who's putting pressure for that. And is there some other motive behind, the obvious kind of, I think potentially it was a way of raising money for Elena's son. I think that Donald Sutherland potentially provided that initial money, but as soon as he learned what was actually happening, he wasn't going to give anything else to the school. And when he alludes to the headmaster that he's given a lot of things to the school, it might also be something that's kind of between the lines and has to do with what's happening here. It's possible that Donald Sutherland has paid for other of his other children that he has had out of wedlock go to Reardon School. I don't know. At any rate, one of the important facts here, one is that the headmaster probably saw Hugh Grant talking to Elena outside the school. And two, the headmaster definitely knew that Hugh Grant said he was at the hospital the night of the fundraiser, right? When Hugh Grant leaves, he later calls Nicole Kidman. She is still at the fundraiser. And when he tells her that he's going to be at the hospital for a while, she goes over and tells her friends, two of her blonde friends, one brunette, and the headmaster is right there. And they actually pan across, and he's the clear guy in the frame during all of that. I think we'll later figure out that that was a key thing. Him learning that, putting the pieces together, figuring out he was probably with Elena. He would have gone there. He may have even gotten there before Hugh Grant left, seen it as an opportune time to kill Elena. Or maybe he didn't even intend to kill her, but you start to wonder in what ways could Elena get him in a corner in terms of whether it was blackmail or it was something where he was feeling pressure that would bring his whole life down. And then he killed Elena Alves. And the whole reason we don't necessarily expect it right now is because there's a lot of exposition that will happen in future episodes that will lead us to that conclusion. The headmaster killed Elena Alves. It's the only solution that leaves me with satisfaction that these hours spent watching The Undoing were well spent.